Hello and welcome to our session on envisioning because future, what it looks like in our context, and also what the role of women in youth is in this space. My name is Mkhize and I will be your moderator for this session. And just to let you know about the running of our session, I will do a brief introduction and then I will welcome to the stage our guest who's going to give a keynote address, and thereafter we will have our panel discussion. So I do invite you to please send through your questions as each of the speakers goes up as we have our conversation for today. And put those questions in because we would like to address it, whether it is something that we are aware that smart cities is a fresh concept to a lot of people, that a lot of people aren't sure, where they fit and how to play in the space. And that's exactly what we're here to do. We're here to co-create together and to build a future together that we can all be proud of. I'm going to ask the team to beam through my presentation to you. And it's a presentation that I'd just like to share with you. As a young person, to be part of this event because I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship, about the African continent, and also how we come together as pioneers in creating the kind of continent we all want to be part of, right? And the kind of future that we all want to be part of. And I'm also a big advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I keep saying to the as I said, my name is Ntsiki. I am a social entrepreneur. I'm the founder of MentHer, which is a global mentorship network supporting female social entrepreneurs. And I'm also the founding editor of MentHer magazine. I'm looking at MentHer and the business that we run. It's something that we launched during the lockdown in 2020. And what we really stand for as an organization is roughly how do we inspire, how do we connect, and how do we empower. So working with female social entrepreneurs in particular was a big thing for us because when you look at a lot of the third sector, which is your volunteer organizations, your nonprofits, your and so forth, and really a lot of the organizations that I believe that have answers to the social issues that we face, that is who is driving the change. And our organization across those pillars of inspire, connect, and empower aligned ourselves with these sustainable development goals to say that we want to support gender equality and reducing that gap, and to also create sustainable economic opportunities for women. And overall is to be a partner for the goals and making sure that those goals are accomplished. I don't know if my screen is frozen, but I'm hoping that the slides are shifting on your side and you are able to see the next slide. Cool, and we can move past this slide. And then just to say, some of the initiatives that we focus on is we've got our social impact fund, what we public excited about. We realize in the work that we do, although we're here to support female entrepreneurs and we're here to support them through mentorship and other avenues, is that a lot of people actually don't know what social entrepreneurship is. Some of the work that we do is also advocating for social entrepreneurship, and we do a lot of that through our magazine. We've got the chapters, which apart from our global community that exists virtually, is giving people an opportunity within their own on testing a minimum viable product. So getting your MVP together and then moving on to say how can you test, how can you get feedback, and how can you re-engineer your product and get back into the market without wasting too much time and money. And then we also have MentHer hubs, which we'd like to launch in the upcoming year, and we'll share a bit more on that. But really looking at those social entrepreneurs that are based in rural and township communities and going, how do we get them to join in the fight, and how do we get them to have access to the ecosystem? And within those particular MentHer hubs, while key focuses around culture, so specifically looking at our rural communities and some peri-urban areas where there's been land relocation to get more agricultural activities happening in those areas. And then also clean energy, clean water, and sustainable housing. And if you could just click forward for me, a quick invitation is for our MVP dinners is to say that our MVP dinners are a space where we invite entrepreneurs, we have conversations, and you're able to network, you're able to share your idea with people in the room who have experience, who can give you feedback, to other entrepreneurs, to potential customers. It's just really good to have that feedback, and then ultimately connect you to potential investors. We specifically at the moment have an MVP dinner program running around sustainable housing and with funders that are interested in supporting female entrepreneurs in construction. So if you are interested, please send through an email to info@menther.co.za. So speaking about smart cities, which is my next slide, is, I think for different mean different, right? And for me, I think this is going as an entrepreneur without experience background in engineering, construction, and any of that, is I always invested in properties. When all my friends moved out of home, I chose to stay at home and I invested in my first property. And it's been a really long, somewhat tedious sometimes, but very interesting, very challenging process, dealing with tenants and all of that. But I really had the fortune that, I was able to go through a period of just investing, and then 2 years ago was able to start constructed under Commander Property is a family business that my sister and I run together, and her being on the tech of that. And then just, moving forward. So we started this project in construction. That project on one side was really great because it was done. But on the second part, it was quite challenging because it's student accommodation. So we, like many entrepreneurs, had to figure out, what do we do with our tenants? Do we still get to make rental? What do we do with now the loan paid back if our students are gone, and so forth? We can click to the next slide. But it was a very interesting growth journey for me. And being my first big project that I've been a part of, I'm quite interested in seeing how do we duplicate these kinds of steps using different technology, using different innovative methods to provide sustainable accommodation to everybody. And one of the things that I find oftentimes when working with people and women is the ask, right? I find that we don't often enough ask for more. So how do we get more young people to ask for more and to join the movement in asking for more, and to trust that their ideas have value, but them as the entrepreneurs running the program have the value add and can actually make the difference? We can jump through to the next slide. More in an African context is really to say, thinking about different people and where you search. So I've got the wonderful opportunity of looking at South Africa and how we exist in different spaces from my personal perspective, where I live on a farm, I work in the city, and a couple of projects that I run are in township communities. So I've got this interplay between these three different spaces that people exist in, and I think very differently around what does sustainable cities look like in each of those contexts. So for me, it looks different from a rural context compared to what I think the city needs, and I look forward to unpacking that conversation today. We can jump through to the next slide. I'm not sure if the slides are skipping on your side or if it's just my screen that is frozen at the moment. Okay, cool. There we go. So just a definition that I wanted to share with you on sustainable cities, and this is something that is in a Deloitte report that was published on smart cities. And what they say is that the ultimate goal of a smart city is transformational, to achieve enhanced quality of life for citizens and deliver tangible benefits at national, provincial, and municipal levels while leveraging our natural resources. And I think that's quite important, that we don't just leverage our natural resources, but we also make a context in which those resources are sustainable. And if we can shift through to my next slide, is just a quick highlight on in this particular Deloitte report and how they break down the components of sustainable cities. And part of that for me is defining what smart cities are. And they speak to smart as investment in human and social capital, in traditional transport, in modern ICT, in communication infrastructure, fuel, and making sure that we're creating a sustainable environment, but also a sustainable economy. And if you can just click through again, so we can just see those different elements that are highlighted in this Deloitte report. I specifically chose this one because I like the various dimensions, so understanding that I think a lot of where smart city conversations are at the moment is right at the high level end where we're talking a lot around goals and aspirations, and it's very pie in the sky thinking, right? But really the conversation, especially from an African perspective, and making sure that we bring in youth who can contribute to, their thoughts on how to be a carbon efficient future, and how do we integrate technology from that perspective, and bringing in women to make sure that there's a consideredness around everyone that's involved in society, and making sure that the people element is well considered. And then also within the ecosystem, making sure that from different pockets across the ecosystem, everybody from public sector to private sector knows the role that they're having to play, and including communities as well. I don't think that we can have and create sustainable smart cities without the involvement of the community, and that really requires us to shift from going into communities and telling people what they need or what they should do, but rather seeing community members as people who have the solutions to their own challenges, and going rather, how do we enable them to create the kinds of smart cities that are adaptive to their context and make sense for their context, and overall making sure that we're interconnected and are utilizing infrastructure, whether it's hard as infrastructure, to the best of our ability. And some examples I wanted to look at, looking into the future for African context and some African smart cities. And if you Google these, critical in highlighting what the different smart cities look like, and it's all, I don't know what the word for the design is, but it's all graphic design at the moment. So it looks very futuristic, like something out of a movie. But there's the Eco Atlantic City that's being planned in Nigeria. There's Konanza Techno City and Tatu City in Kenya. There's Kigali City in Rwanda, and there's Modern City in South Africa. And those are all really, so I mean, I don't want to dive into that because our panel discussion will unpack a bit more aspects around smart cities and how we go about creating those. But I really like these particular examples because they also highlight how each of these countries have thought specifically around what does smart cities look like in their context. And then something else I wanted to do was to just share some examples of smart startups that I think are really good for us to consider, because when I think about smart cities, it's not just the tech that's involved in the city in terms of can I fix everything using my phone or whatever it is, but it's to say from the technology in general, the infrastructure in general, what are we inputting? And Startup Healthy has some really cool ideas on what you see on the left-hand side is a plastic road. So it's made from recycled plastic. It takes less time to install. It has a drainage system underneath that then feeds, when it rains, feeds water back into the soil. And I thought that was really cool. It lasts a lot longer than our current roads. And it's a lot cheaper to implement. And they also have rapid roll solar panels, which are really like a solar panel that you can get to a particular area where it's needed. And I think the example that they used here was how they can implement these in combination for farming technology. And you really just get to a place and you roll out these solar panels, which is really efficient when you think about the cost of putting up solar panels. There's also an example across the housing sector. There was a stat that I came across by Shelter Afrique, and they said across Africa there are 56 million missing housing units, right? So if you think about homelessness, if you think about people who live in dilapidated housing or in improper infrastructure or dilapidated buildings, whatever it is, that there really is a call for more housing solutions. And this is a space, again, that I think a lot of young people and women as well can get involved in. And a few examples I wanted to highlight here is the T-based group, who are based in South Africa, and they've got a modular housing solution that they developed. And I think this is currently implemented in the Eastern Cape, but it's really panels that come in that are all made from recycled material, and you can get a house up into the other organization, and I think this is based across the continent, is plastic, the biosphere, and eco bricks, and they really look at how they can use plastic and eco bricks to rebuild spaces. And if you go into the information, they have so much that they share around how do we create eco bricks, and the stats around that on the conversion of waste that's currently in landfills and that's currently in our oceans that is plastic, and how do we do different. And then also looking at clay bricks, that it's not just about making traditional bricks, but there's other forms of bricks that we can make as well. So thinking of all these things, and when I look at this, I touch points where we can involve entrepreneurs and get them to create, get them to be refuse collectors. There's so many different kind around that. And then somebody else also wanted to highlight is Maxwell, who's from Zimbabwe, who has invented a smart car, which doesn't require to be charged as you can see as a Tesla vehicle. And he is a founder and innovator at Space Technologies. I think he also invented a helicopter as well. But I really think it's really smart innovations like this. What I found interesting about his story was that I think he only finished school. I think he dropped out of school when he was 14 or something like that. So that for me is quite interesting. And then jumping forward and saying, what does the context look like for us, right? That we kind of need artificial intelligence from perspective, and this is all research taken from the University of Pretoria. Quite a bit of work with entrepreneurship development and higher education, and looking at how do we get people who are qualifying at university level to think about their vocation of study, but with an entrepreneurial application. But then also looking at universities as hubs and saying, how do we get those ideas that come through and shift them into innovations that can be implemented? So there's, AI for farming. There is high sensors within trucks and on roads that can affect, when do repairs need to be done and how does that work? There's smart cities that monitor road infrastructure and the volumes of traffic, and that can influence the way that traffic lights work and their integration, as well as research around big data as well that can influence information on sanitation, transportation, and other departments, and making sure that there's a cohesive synergy between each of the departments. What I'd love to see is not just organizations across sectors, but even within sectors, that people aren't working in silos and that we are all coming together to make sure that we make a difference. And then finally, things around sensors and artificial intelligence, working around security and so forth. But it's really that combination of, energy, water, ICT, big data, all of that, and making sure that it's coming together to create smart cities, but also sustainable cities. And overall, our ethos at MentHer is, when we think about women and youth, it's really achieving equality for all, and making sure that everyone is included in the ideation process, in the innovation, and coming up with the solutions, and then in executing those solutions. And because we work with entrepreneurs that are in idea stage, we know that we have a higher sensitivity to the fact that, some people need you to hold their hand, right? And when you look at our education levels, when you look at the levels of unemployment, people might want to take initiative with this, but not necessarily know where to start. So for me, a big part of the work that we do is making sure that we're meeting people where they are and holding their hands and bringing them on this journey with us. And I look forward to unpacking this in our panel discussion, so speaking to our fantastic set of panelists today around, the definition of smart cities and what do we mean by them and what does that look like in an African context, our environment, and do we have the right kind of leaders, and how far ahead are our leaders thinking, and do we have the right policy and regulations? I was part of a project a couple of years ago to create housing panels from recycled plastic. And one of the issues that we came across was approving a particular method from the Department of Housing and Settlement. So, what does the environment look like? And then what are the processes that are required to get ahead, and how inclusive is this? And how aligned is it to an Afrocentric context? We'll unpack all of that with our panel. And finally, for everyone who's joining us, I really just want to say to you, go out into the world and do well, but more importantly, go out into the world and do good. And that's one of my favorite quotes by Mina Maya, is that, we're all on this mission to do well, but in the process of doing well, let's be mindful to do good as well. And then finally, for just being part of this event, I'd like to gift everybody with a free gift, which is our MentHer magazine, and that's a free digital copy. That visit our website, www.menther.a/magazine, and you can get a copy of our magazine. And if you know entrepreneurs that you mentor, if you know young ladies, this is a free resource that you can give them that they can read through and really get inspired, but also find touch points that they can plug in. And that's all for my introduction. Thank you very much. And I now want to welcome to our virtual stage our first keynote speaker, and he's really going to speak to us about an African journey through a continent littered with smart city visions. Please welcome to the stage Henning Rasmuss, who's the founding director of Paragon Group, and just give you some highlights around Henning. Henning has a really big background around built in countries since 2001. His personal project experience dates back to work he's done in Angola, Botswana, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Tanzania, the DRC, Congo, Ethiopia, Gabon, Ghana, and the list goes on. So I think really when we're talking about innovations across the continent, he's definitely the man to hear from. Welcome, Henning.
Thank you very much, Ntsiki. Yeah, so I work as an architect. I'm not going to speak as an architect, but maybe more as a citizen. It's one of my realizations that smart cities need smart citizens. But I am a visual person, and we agreed with Lindiwe, who organized the conference content, that I would do a slightly tongue-in-cheek sort of trawl through the African landscape. I am an architect by training. I live in Johannesburg, but for the last 8 years, I've only worked on this continent, only outside of South Africa. So I have a few insights. I was born as a guy with strong opinions. I am cynical by nature. Some of my comments will be cynical. I do apologize for that, but it's in my DNA. And then I was never an Afro-pessimist. Otherwise, I wouldn't have started working in Africa or continue living here for that matter. But I'm maybe an Afro-realist and an Afro-pragmatist by now. I'm going to switch to a presentation and really get going. Thank you for the invitation. The smart cities are very much a gadget word. They're a trendy word. There are more and more conferences, including this one. It is a newish thing in South Africa, a newish thing in Africa. But of course, do you want a smart city? Of course, we all want smart cities. Everybody wants one. So at a visual level, and I'm just taking you on a journey of images that maybe trigger some ideas and a debate here or later. There are seductive images. I mean, there's a lot of this kind of Blade Runner-ish, futuristic kind of thing in this world, and we all get seduced by this. I think everybody who's alive on the planet at the moment, 8 billion of us, have learned how to be seduced by technology and its promise. And this is always in the room. And there's a lot of people at this conference or on this webinar who will talk about the technological side, and that's one side. And technology does deliver broadly what it promises, and we have learned to trust technology to deliver what it promises. But technology is only one part, and the question is what the other missing pieces are. I graduated in 1994, and so Ntsiki said a moment ago, shared this quote from Deloitte that smart cities are really about a better quality of life. So I graduated into this new future in South Africa with this amazing central voting slogan by a bunch of people that we all know. And so this is the country. We should be in the country governed by the people who want everything, including a smart city, if this is about quality of life. When I trawl or when I take you on a little journey through the African continent and some of the smart cities that are there, and I've been looking at this, I've spoken at a few conferences, but really just go to Google Images, type in African smart cities, and you kind of get to the content that's there. The reality of building cities is that they are long-term projects and that politicians are always about short-term gain. Even those politicians who rule a country for 27 years are currently, it seems, only out for the short-term gain. So there is in the imagery, and obviously none of these are my or my office's designs, in the imagery of smart cities in Africa is certainly an embedded mythical thing. Some of it comes from America, some of it is Hollywood-based. Actually, Wakanda comes from a set of comics. So it's astounding how arresting, other than the technology, seductive technology images, how much of the imagery is kind of this Hollywood version of Africa. And maybe that's fine because somewhere one has to, like, smart cities need pictures. But I want to talk about how maybe smart or unsmart some of the drivers of African city projects are. So let's just say every country should want one. Probably every president wants at least one. Mauritius wants 8 because every sugar baron in Mauritius has started a smart city on their land because the economy is changing away from sugar to property, hopefully. And so in Egypt, they want 20 smart cities. They're building maybe one. So to jump from the American myth in Ghana, there's an actual place proposed called Wakanda City. So the Ghanaians are very connected to America, so they took the straight jump. And Wakanda City is really maybe not a city, but is touted as a center for the returning diaspora, let's call it a center of excellence for knowledge about Africa and places where one can get connected to one's African heritage if one is Black. So I'm just sharing this image because, again, there's something fantastical and exotic about it, and just wanted to share it. I mean, Ghanaians are quite connected to mainly Atlanta and also London. And so in Ghana, you went from Wakanda, the movie thing, to Wakanda City as a project. Also in Ghana, a bunch of Italian architects who originated in Renzo Piano's office came up with what was called Hope City. It was floated to great fanfare probably 8 years ago. The first phase was supposed to have been built in 2016, but let's not talk about what didn't happen. Part of the smart city rhetoric and the mythology and maybe not rhetoric, the narrative is about cultural myths. And so the one in Ghana went back to these traditional huts. It then took a modernized version to really posit fully integrated vertical cities, for lack of a better word, or vertical towers that replicate a city. So it is a city at a building scale. And maybe there's something in this scale which is kind of stupendously ambitious, but also realistic, because cities on huge pieces of land don't build themselves easily on a continent where land and land control is tightly controlled, and it's difficult to get large pieces together. But let me move on. Then we have the much more showy Senegalese Akon city. So Akon here is the glamorous guy. I mean, he could be a wealth preacher in Senegal or in Nigeria. Dresses a bit like the guy who runs these massive, these guys who run these massive wealth churches. But all of this is good. I mean, this is a Senegalese originated African American who wants to bring back to Africa development. All of that is good. This, of course, this is a smart city. If you look at it, I mean, the question in all the graphics and all the pictures, and one just has to be careful, is never mind the buildability of this. Let's say this is all buildable technically. How big are the chunks? Because African property economies are made out of quite small pieces. The average corporate lease in Nairobi is between 150 and 600 square meters. So these kind of pictures of cities that consist of chunks that at a glance are 60 to 150,000 square meters in extent are certainly not smart. And I think if Africa is going to continue positing smart cities and generating images that have any credibility, we need to start having cities that are slightly less, well, this one comes out of Dubai, done by a bunch of Dubai architects, and we need something that's much more finely grained. But here's Akon. You can have one of these in Senegal. Here's the man, the suit, the architecture, and you can also have one in Uganda. So in Uganda, what happens is that a guy like Akon makes news in Senegal, and the president of Uganda gives him, I think, 850 hectares of land. So also there's a lot of trawling through the land books of presidents, fluffing up ideas and getting assigned pieces of land, which obviously are worth a lot. But I just wanted to share these ideas with you, how they get floated, how arrestingly strange some of the architecture is. And of course, architecture is the end result. The question is, are these quality environments with a great quality of life for people? Moving straight along, Egypt is building a new capital city. These are very early renderings. Egypt's certainly on the go. There's a lot of talk about technology implications. The companies are there that have stuck up their hand, that have gotten the contracts, and this is under construction. A lot of technology rollout. Egypt, sometimes we don't think of it as part of Africa, but it's certainly there. In the DRC, just north of Kinshasa, a Senegalese architect has, in a consortium, designed, a place called Kitoko. Of course, Kitoko is immediately called a smart city. The land development model behind Kitoko is insane. The land comes for free, and the first square meter is supposed to be sold at $1,000 a square meter, a bulk square meter. So you're taking land in the middle of nowhere to hero prices. But there's no harm in trying. It is an amazing circus of architectural forms, and it is being driven. It has presidential backing, and certainly those triangular towers will be government ministries. So you can also create the virtuous circle of making government inhabit its own city. I think there's a question of how smart some of these things are. However, Kitoko sits in a tradition of current projects that posit new cities outside of African capital cities. Maybe the wiser ones don't immediately call their city smart, but smart is also definitely a marketing wrapper and a packaging thing. And that's good and bad, like all things in life. Obviously not very developed design, but you can fully imagine the kind of presentations that go down in presidential palaces. Konza City is a Kenyan government-backed initiative on government land. It obviously competes with places like Tatu City that are more also, let's say, government agreed and backed, but privately initiated. There will be other speakers at this conference about Konza City. I want to take nothing away from it. The master plan was done by Shop Architects in New York. I think there's something more feasible and maybe more realistic. But again, the property pieces, speaking as an architect, will be made up of pieces inside the Kenyan property economy. And in the Kenyan property economy, a 5,000 square meter building is good. A 15,000 square meter building is about as big as it gets. 40 to 60,000 square meter buildings arise once every few years. I'm talking about commercial buildings, office buildings. So one needs to really look at these things as 30 to 40 to 50-year projects, because they also subtract from an existing city economy. But the images are astounding, seductive, because Kenya positions itself as a silicon savannah. The smart city narrative fits very neatly into its national narrative of itself. And that's good and valid, but so you can have these amazing marketing renderings with ostriches and egrets. There's also other ones with giraffes. And maybe that's a great lifestyle, and maybe there's something to that. Just wanted to share these images and maybe share how they connected to other narratives about the places where they arise. Lanseria, Ntsiki mentioned Modderfontein. Modderfontein was the Chinese-driven smart city a few years ago, backed by the Gauteng ANC government. This year, in the last 2 years, President Ramaphosa has been speaking about Lanseria. These are very chunky early stage images of a master plan. What you see in the bottom left-hand corner is the existing runways. The N14 highway runs through the middle of the picture. And so the question is, where are the end users? Which economy is driving this actually? And what are the chunks that are going to make it up? But we all know that our economies in Africa are hugely under pressure. Capital cities are only just functioning. So the Smart City project is either one of new cities, and there's a lot of players in that, or intervening in the current cities. I mean, if you look at the pictures that have been circulated of Lanseria and its early stage, and the players involved have said that, of course, all this infrastructure must come first. There's really nothing in this picture that is any different from any of the privately initiated environments that we know. I'm saying that because the marketing or blurbs or what's been in the press about Lanseria master plan says there'll be great Wi-Fi and CCTV cameras and non-motorized transport. But that is not enough to make a great city, to make a smart city. The CCTV camera surveillance, we all know as a South African security thing, but other smart cities are already rolling out drone-based security systems where drones can attack and pepper spray criminals, alleged criminals who are on a criminal database. So there are aspects to smart city technology and global citizen surveillance that are certainly dark. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm just saying it because I think there's something also possibly sinister about the levels of control systems that are being built into smart cities. But as I said, I was born cynical, and so that's the way I look at it. Doesn't mean I'm right. It just means these pictures evoke some of that. I need to leave some time for questions, and I'm finishing with the picture part of my presentation. And I wanted to put into this room as Henning, the South African citizen or African citizen, that the debate must include always, especially in Africa, the question of who the citizens are. We have a difficult continent in which citizens and government do not often work together. The power landscape, the distribution of power, the way that power rises to the surface, the way that powerful people enrich themselves in this continent and often run countries for decades without any true regard for their populations is certainly a bad starting point for talking about smart cities. However, Brave New World, the question is, what do we do with the technology? There is powerful technology behind smart cities that can make life better. There are management tools, there are measurement tools, there are early warning tools, there are informational tools, there are service delivery tools that are without doubt good. But the question is, what kind of citizens demand this from what kind of city governments? Let's not talk about city governments rather than national governments. I have a doubt. So many African governments and many governments in the world, actually, let's forget about Africa. We are at an African Smart City Summit, but many African governments say they want smart cities. Well, with smart cities becomes control and service delivery and, measurement of things and ability to pay tax and pay per use for everything. But also in the end, you get powerful citizens, smart citizens. You get citizens who are empowered through information and access to be more demanding. And I ask myself how many governments on this continent honestly want active, informed, demanding populations. Because the way that in many, many countries in the world and on this continent, governments treat their populations is with a professional, institutionalized disdain. So smart cities are maybe the great project of citizens and not so much of politicians. And I'm asking the question whether we have the leaders and governors on our continent who honestly want the kind of smart citizens that come with the technology. Because African populations are reasonably passive and not very demanding and probably get a really raw deal. Because if that wasn't true, and I'm just saying it, why is it possible, for example, that election after election runs in Kenya without an improvement in the traffic system of Nairobi? Why is it possible that Angola extracts billions and billions and billions of dollars out of the population and the country every year of oil revenue and gets the Swedish government and Swedish people to run their health systems? So I don't want to sound like an Afro-pessimist. I probably am in this minute. The real benefit of smart cities for me as a citizen, and I wanted to share that, is we as citizens can, through this process and this technology, become immensely powerful, much more powerful and demanding than we are. But when we become that powerful, will we have receptive people who run our cities who actually want us to be that? There is a trust deficit, and so the smart city movement is a multi-stakeholder movement, if I want to call it a movement. and the trust deficit between people and rulers, governors, and those who make decisions at a design level has to be actively removed, and that if it hasn't started, has to start, and we need to call it that. There's no point in believing in this better, greater life if the trust deficit between those in power and those who are governed on this continent is not improved. And this is a transnational continental project. And we are not the only ones who have bad governments, but in Africa, there's a long history for raw discrimination around power, and that's a massive project. And if the smart city debate and smart city conferences only achieve that, that will be a great achievement. When I talk about a social compact, the social compact is the agreement. It might be an unspoken one. It may result in cultural values. It's a values-based engagement and a deal between a nation or a city and the collective of all people and individuals. And in that, power is implicit. And so we, on this continent, given our colonial history, the pre-colonial history, the post-colonial history, and the coming way that the world is being organized after the so-called Great Reset, we do not have the best basis for smart cities. So we need to build the base every day while we get seduced by the technology and while we make incremental changes. Having said that, if you come off a weak base of anything, you can have huge improvements. So the African Smart City project is an astoundingly necessary one and really exciting. But a lot of it sits at this level of citizenship and process and management and collaborative work, and not so much at a design level. As an architect, sure, me, my company, love to participate, love to contribute. But I'm speaking here as a citizen of Africa. We are in square one at a citizenship level. And so this is a long journey. However, I wanted to leave you with this image. On the left is an image that I love. It's, in my view, Joe Citizen, who's carrying a heavy load. Because on this continent, citizens carry a heavy load and cities do not work very well for them. So Joe Citizen can have a much better life and could carry a lighter load. What Joe Citizen also carries in this picture is the responsibility to contribute, because nothing comes on a platter. So if we want smart cities as a collective, we have to start thinking and acting like smart citizens. And that doesn't mean ordering your next pizza from Uber Eats. That has to do with our conduct in our societies. And with that, I want to stop talking. Thank you very much.
Much for that snapshot across the African continent. I really appreciate your insights and that declaration, or the disclaimer rather, about the cynicism. But I really appreciate that, because I think it's necessary that we shouldn't be taken up in a whirlwind of what sounds like it's going to be exciting and beneficial without actually interrogating what it means and who it actually benefits and where the key interests lie. So before I add in some of my questions, I see there's questions in here from the audience. And starting maybe from the more cynical side, there's a question here from Antonio, and he asks, are smart cities an instrument or mechanism for governments to control citizens?
Sorry, just repeat that. You broke up for a moment.
Sorry, he asks, are smart cities not an instrument or mechanism for governments to control citizens?
Of course they are. I mean, so this is cynical me talking. Of course they are. And I think really the world is completely differently controlled after COVID. And so COVID caused this thing to have different drivers. You know, I sometimes wish government knew more about us as people. So, because I think sometimes government knows nothing about people on the ground. So I think this is both good and bad. I think the control reach is something where civil society needs to push back. And that's a massive debate about data privacy, about the infringement of the state. But part of the seduction is that we can be controlled and monitored, like maybe we don't want to. But if we all didn't want to be controlled and monitored by corporations and states, none of us should have started using Facebook 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's foresight people perhaps didn't have then. And then there's another combined question here on where does the South African smart city where is the South African smart city policy, and which government department handles it?
My guess would be, and I stand to be corrected, that it would be partly Department of Human Settlements, because it deals, a lot of it deals with housing and how people, like housing. Government wants, but where does the policy sit? Is there a smart city policy? I think our president has said that there should be. And the South African narrative is that these new cities are also planned in an integrated way that undoes apartheid era planning. And that's good. So let's do that. I don't believe that there is a policy as such, but I would start with Department of Human Settlements, because it's certainly not public works.
Yeah. Awesome. And then a question here from Dylan saying just thank you for your remarks. And then in your opinion, what is the best example of a smart city in the current day and age?
Sure. From what I've heard in terms of technology integration, what I'm aware of, Copenhagen is quite advanced in Denmark. I had the privilege to go there about 3 years ago on a delegation led by the Ghanaian embassy, actually. And we were introduced to actual real-time working smart city technologies around traffic management of cyclists and citywide apps. I mean, Copenhagen runs a citizen app, which I think 87% of all residents are actively using every day, so the city can properly communicate with its citizens, and does. So, for example, I mean, God, I would love the city of Johannesburg to have a system that can communicate with me, because it doesn't. So I think Copenhagen is amazing in that way. Amsterdam, I believe, also has good systems. But if you want to talk about the technology impact and the ability to connect management to people, in my view, Copenhagen has done a lot. There may be other cities like that, but that's the one I'm aware of. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect, thank you. And in your presentation, you used Wakanda as an example, which I thought was fantastic. And I'm interested from your perspective as an architect, but also somebody who's worked so widely across the continent. Is do Africans want smart cities in the same way that we talk about smart cities? And what I mean by that is a lot of what we saw in Wakanda was the integration of technology, but African customs and traditions and cultures and so forth. That was really well celebrated. So are we seeing smart cities that are going to be built as huts? Is that an interest? Is there more of a Western aspiration to what smart cities should look like, and not so much of an African customization?
Look, it's a really interesting debate and a really interesting question. Of course, everybody wants the benefits. So the question is, what architectural expression should these cities have? They should certainly have a localized expression. In the global economy, every city, including every African city, is exposed to the big flattening of Instagram and Pinterest around architecture, and it's already started. Then architectural software and design software flattens cultural expression of buildings across the world. So we see buildings arising across the world that are driven by the rendering abilities of certain software programs. But what should people want? I think it is entirely wrong to talk about an African architecture, because nobody talks about an Asian architecture or a European architecture. if you went to a bunch of European citizens and asked them whether their cities are European, they'd get quite offended and would want to point you to the fact that they're French or German or Belgian. So I think the African debate is far too wide and doesn't get us very far. I don't even believe that there are valid national architectures. I believe that there are valid city level architectures, because cities have microclimates and have micro cultures and have micro economies, because the expression of buildings and what one is capable of building relies very much on what is on the ground. Who is there? Who are the people building these things? Who are back to your work, Ntsiki, where are the women who are building buildings in Dakar? Who has the skill, and where is this? So I believe that African citizens in African cities have the right to see in their lifetime buildings that have an architectural and cultural expression, by extension, that is at least in part properly expressive of where they are in the world. I think it would be wonderful, and I think people deserve that. And if they start seeing it, they will want more of it. At the moment, those in power who commission projects import images from wherever, and architecture is a global game. So this is a large debate, but I think an African narrative is far too wide. And maybe I must stop talking. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I think finally, just to ask you, with things as they are at the moment, who benefits the most from a smart city?
Corporations who harvest data and sell it and market. but I'm cynical. I'm cynical.
Yeah.
I mean,
no,
I live in Johannesburg. I live in Johannesburg. I lived here all my life, and there's no smart city reach into my life where I can measure the benefit of Johannesburg possibly being a smart city, like not in a fraction. And maybe that'll change over the next few years. But somewhere my information is being harvested and sold to corporations who promise me, who sell me products off that. And that's the starting point, and it needs to get better.
I completely agree with you on that. And then finally, before we get into our panel discussion, is just to know from you as a citizen and as an architect, contributing where you can, where would you like to see this smart city movement in the next 10 to 20 years?
I think we should properly fix the cities that we have before we go. There are new cities being built on the continent. I don't think we need to build new smart cities, except in places where smart cities have already been proposed and make social and economic sense, less so political sense. But really, the last thing we need is to start afresh, make the cities work where 1.8 billion people live. Because if we rely on the new cities, it's going to be an elitist project. And
I completely agree with you there. It shouldn't be, and we should also really strive for maximum inclusion where we can and fix where we are already. Henning, thank you so much for sharing your remarks with us and your insights with us. Really appreciate your time. I know you have to leave us, so I do want to encourage people on the app, if you want to connect, please do so. And we will continue this discussion with our panelists. Henning, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'd like to welcome to our virtual stage our panelists that are going to be joining us for this afternoon. And I'm sure there's a couple of things that Henning spoke to that our panelists would like to pick up on. And I look forward to a very interesting, engaging, and dynamic discussion. So really the theme for our panel discussion is skills development and going new foundational skills in smart cities, right? Do we have the skills? Where are we positioned at the moment, and how do we keep going on this path? So firstly, our virtual stage, Professor Barry Blalotsky, who's a director at the Joburg Center for Software Engineering, School of Electrical and Information Engineering at this university. My second panelist for the afternoon is Jabu Makubu, who's a lecturer of architecture and Graduate School of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg. Also welcome David Olatunji, who's the president and founder of African Smart Cities Innovation. And then welcome as well Eva Rakulwa, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Electronic Media Institute of, and then finally Malani Padayachi Saman, who's the Chief Officer at MATCHMAKING Group. And welcome, those are all my panelists for this afternoon, and you'll see them all coming up on your screen. And really where I would like to start our conversation, and I think just start, we'll go in the order of introduction. So starting with you, Barry, is just from each of our panelists, I would firstly like to start with the definition, right? So what do smart cities mean to you? And just in the context that you are in, if you contextualize what do smart cities look like? You know, so from an engineering perspective, architecture perspective, in the spaces that you work in and the project that you are part of, and the work that you've pioneered, could you let our audience know what smart cities look like in your context? To you.
So, firstly, thank you, and greetings to the audience and my fellow panelists. I think that, and it's clearly a very broad topic, and I think that I'll kind of stick to my knitting and talk about the things that I know about. So I'll talk about skills. I'll talk about the kind of skills we'll need for a smart city, and then I'll talk about how digital will play a part in smart cities. So I've seen all those wonderful pictures, but underlying any smart city today is digital. And at the very, very least, we need fantastic connectivity to make smart cities work. And we then need to put technology on top of the connectivity, hardware and software, to be able to do smart things. And I think I do agree with the previous comment that it's about people. It's not about a vanity project for a government to build a smart city in the middle of the African savannah. It's about how you create a space that'll work for a group of citizens. I constantly think about this huge challenge that my children will face, in that our population on this continent of Africa is set to double by 2050. And it's not a loose thought. The people are already born that will give birth to the children that will double our population. So by 2050, we'll be sitting at over 2.5 billion people in Africa. 60% of them, we told, will be living in cities. So 60% of our population of 2.5 billion will be living in African cities. And it means that we're going to have to kind of do a lot of things. We're going to have to make our cities work, and we're going to have to make them much bigger. And it will be digital technology. So there's digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, will be at full swing in the middle of this century. And digital will be at the heart of making our cities work. And they have to create lives that people can live and sustain. We have to provide food and healthcare and education and everything that our population will need in the 21st century. So to me, a smart city will be more of the same, but different. And the skills that we're going to need to be able to build the technology that will underpin that smart Africa will be more of the same, but different. It's not that we'll wave a magic wand and technology we've never thought of will appear. It will be the technology we're using right now, but using it to scale and using it to do more ambitious things. So we need to educate people. We need to make them comfortable in digital, and we need to grow our technology and grow our continent. I could speak for hours, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Prof. Barry, for that alignment. Jabu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ntsiki, and to everyone for inviting us to this session. As Henning was presenting, I was just going, oh my word, Henning is saying all the things that I was planning on opening with, because we come from the same discipline. I'm also in the spatial built environment discipline from architecture and particularly urban design. And the issues around place and space making are very central to how we discuss other topics such as smart cities. And what we see, similar to the images that Henning presented, are these almost rendered images that come out of elsewhere, whether it be China, Dubai, or even America, and landing in Africa. And somehow we must make do with that. To me, I think that project is counterproductive to the many projects that are already happening that are trying to undo the legacy of the past, which are still built on apartheid and colonial principles and foundations. And so those images that we see, which in many cases do not center or do not reflect an African, and again, I use that word very lightly, but an African experience of the city, I think to me is very problematic, because those renders of glass buildings, air conditioned, automated, without any understanding of the textures of the city that we live in, and many of our people are currently having to navigate. And so how do we then import these ideas and these values without critically looking at them and discussing them? And maybe that's not necessarily what we should be aspiring to. To me, what's really interesting is that in education, we are also using these programs, Revit, SketchUp, AutoCAD, which come preset with a certain sort of view of what cityness is and should look like. And in many of these programs, 3D rendering programs, they have things such as families, which I find very interesting. But in those families, whether it be families of materials, of construction technology, of processes of building, the families do not include a variety of the complexity of our city. For instance, when you look at scale figures and images, most of those people that we use to render these images of a smart city show figures and people that are non-African. And so it's almost presenting this idea that a smart city is outside of us. It needs to come here, and somehow we must make way with it. To me, I think those are some of the key issues that we really need to think about and discuss when we talk about smart city before we adopt it. What do we mean by a world-class African city? In Johannesburg, that is our slogan. But really, what do we mean by it? And have we really interrogated it enough for us to adopt those kinds of principles and values? And I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Jabu. I like those points, and we'll definitely come back around and unpack those. Trevor, for you, what does a smart city look like in your context?
Thank you very much, Ntsiki, and good afternoon to everyone. Well, for me, a smart city is not necessarily a new city that will be built or erected somewhere in a different space. I believe that smart cities are actually, or should be, a transformation of what we have already. I believe that it should not be something that is separate, that is parallel. In other words, that we should not be trying to build a new landscape out there that is parallel to what we have, which will perpetuate differential lifestyles and inequality probably, but it should strive to further integrate those that were previously excluded from the mainstream city life. I can say this because it's been bugging me really, the question that you asked. I was going to ask that very same question. What do we really mean by a smart city, in an African context? And I believe that it should be looked at it from that point of view, not from an externalist point of view, or from other continents point of view. And it should integrate with our cultural and societal or social fabric or how we live in Africa. And I believe as well that it should talk to the current trends or maybe future trends that are emerging. One of them being that there's quite a lot of migration. Well, there's still rural areas, but there's migration towards urban areas. But also these urban rural areas are more kind of urbanizing, and the lifestyles are no longer that different. And it should also allow for that movement between the two, or the connectivity between the two, geographical scenarios, which is your more urban and your more rural, because Africa in its real context is rural. So the other question that I have is actually, or maybe what we need to look at when looking at smart cities is what kind of work will need to be done to transform our cities, or to build to develop the smart cities. And that will influence the kind of skills that will be required. And I believe that we will have different layers of skills. Maybe I would just for the sake or lack of a better word say, or that we will have categories. Maybe the lowest categories would be ordinary citizens that are just living in that place or in that city. And then those who just need just generic awareness about, how that city is transforming and how they can, better use the facilities or amenities in that city. And then secondly, you will have probably more like your semi-skilled or your entry-level people that are supporting the smartifying of the cities, if there's that word, who are more like semi-technicians, who may not necessarily, this may cut across various sectors in that they may not necessarily be technology people, but they may be a plumber or a builder who will need to know how to employ smart technologies or new innovative ways of doing their work to improve what the product will end up being like. And then you'll have another category, more of a high-end category of your technicians and experts who will be giving advisory, but also innovating. You need your innovators as well in a technical field who will be innovating new solutions, because we do not necessarily want to import existing solutions. We can use those that can work for us in the cities, but we should also leverage on our own skills and own innovations that may come through. So you'll have those high-end skills that are required for us to be able to do that and transform our cities. And I believe that we need to prepare ourselves the question is, who will develop these skills? And how do we prepare ourselves to ensure that we have these skills so that we can harness, how this movement or create a movement or a revolution that will drive the building of smart cities in the African context. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. And I think that's definitely a big point to unpack around the skills and where each of those skills sit and what that looks like in our context. I'm moving over to Malani. What do smart cities look like in your context?
Thanks, Ntsiki. And thank you for the invitation to actually participate on this panel. But having listened to all of my fellow panelists, when you sort of fought down the line, most of the panelists have already addressed some of the issues that I was hoping to also cover. So as they're going through it, I've been ticking off my tick box here. But just in terms of what does it mean to me without having to repeat what has already been stated, I think that, the point that Henning made in his presentation is very profound in the sense is, what does a smart citizen look like? And the idea around awareness creation to be able to respond and to be accepting of a smart city concept is something that needs to be seriously looked at across the board. But more importantly, it also talks to activism And unless you have a mature sort of active citizenry that's able to then dictate how what form a smart city would take, it's almost, sort of fighting with something that you can't really solve without knowing how it needs to be solved and by whom. So in my context, whilst we talk smart cities, it's very exciting, the pictures that were shown. And as Jabo has indicated, it's almost like first world kind of concepts being imposed on the continent, which is not necessarily probably the best way to go about it. And therefore, I'm a firm believer that when we look at smart cities, it's also about understanding, what our needs are on the continent in terms of addressing some of the legacy issues that we faced with as well. So more importantly, I feel it's more of a hybrid. But my thinking of smart cities is not just the technology, driving it and the digitization and all of that, which is what is tended to be focused on most of the time. To me, it's more than that. It's more about how do we actually address environmental issues? How do we create closed systems? From water, from an energy perspective, and more importantly, how do we actually ensure? Because I think with smart cities, what it gives us an opportunity to actually make sure that our young population, particularly in Africa, Africa's got a very huge young population. It gives us an opportunity to maybe, in creating sort of hybrid smart cities, to be able to position our majority of our young people, not in the sort of labor-intensive skills market that we generally tend to focus in, but more on the high-end opportunities and skills that would be required to drive smart cities forward. And I see it in a kind of a threefold approach. If we were to focus on our young population and get their skills ready to be able to be responsive to smart city requirements, or hybrid smart cities, that's what I prefer to call it. And then obviously it would also create a fast track opportunity for us to address, because in any of these hybrid smart city concepts, bulk infrastructure is a key driver. If you don't have that, you actually don't have the opportunity to build a smart city. So in many of our countries, bulk infrastructure is a serious concern. To drive, irrespective of what it is, whether it's water, ICT, whatever you name it, it's a challenge. So this gives us an opportunity to be able to plan appropriately. And I think even in the planning opportunities, it's important that there are some planning opportunities that we should not necessarily be focused in country, but more at a regional or on a continent basis, which gives it that much more benefit to be able to reach most of our population if we look at things collectively. And then certainly on the interconnectivity, many of the panelists have mentioned the issue about legacy issues. It is important for us to have a very considered approach in terms of how we actually deal with this, because particularly in South Africa, communities have been divided. There are major legacy issues that we need to unravel and to make sure we don't make the same mistakes. And more importantly, I think the pandemic has also influenced that. Besides, urbanization trends, we got semigration, where people are actually choosing deliberately to work in rural environments. And the pandemic has resulted in that. So until we know what individuals require and what citizens need and want, it's very difficult for us to prescribe certain sort of concepts, high-end concepts, to be able to solve problems. So I believe it's a more of an integrated and holistic approach. My focus would certainly be, I think, in any of these initiatives, the environment consideration is key and foremost, and what comes out of that is actually quite exciting. But how do we then sort of create these hybrid smart cities that's pretty much unique to what the African continent needs currently? So I'm going to stop there.
Fantastic.
Thank you
so much, Melanie. And I really appreciate those two highlights on really hybrid and the environment. And I think that's very key, and especially when we think about closing the loop and how do we have efficient closed loop and circular economy systems. And then finally, David, from your context, how would you define a smart city? What do smart cities look like in your context?
Oh, good afternoon, everybody from Abuja. And I'm so sorry for the challenge in the connectivity. Back to the definition of the smart cities, it is actually not a new phenomenon, and it is just a label for a model cities. And this is actually been derived from deep research of urban developers and urban planning. And actually, in Back to Africa, we stand better chances of having the most fastest growing smart cities in the world in the next coming years. And because we have the already existing infrastructures that are yet to be remodernized, to be restructured to a modern cities. So I think my definition of that is nothing so new about the smart city, because we have all these structures already. It is just all about introducing the technology and innovation into an existing environment and existing structures that we have in African continent. And getting this done, most of the times it's not too easy for a private sector or expatriates to get it done without the engagement of the government. The government at all levels have to really understand this vision, have to really understand, key into this project as African projects. It gladdens my heart to know that even the African Union at the continental levels has a blueprint of the African smart cities, and it is being tagged the African of our dream, the African we want. So, and the all member states are also expected to a key into the project. Back in Nigeria here, the government of Nigeria adopted that in 2017, and even Rwanda, South Africa, of course, and so many other African countries. So by and large, it is so much important for the policy and decision makers to actually key into this project to make it much a more driven project for the continent and a much beneficiary to the citizens and to the investors. This is very important. And back in African smart cities where I am, we have actually been engaging with the relevant government agencies from the local government, state level, federal level, even at the continental level, because we found out that it is very important for the government to really understand why they need to prioritize their interests and focus in state and national and continental development. It is very important. It is no longer the wealth of oil or agriculture or some other means or politics. No, but rather it should be able to be the wealth of innovation, technologies, and smart cities. This is very, very important. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. And I really like that comment on innovation, that it's really about, for me, social innovation. How do we then incorporate those innovations into our various contexts? There's just an audience comment here from Deliso, who says that there is smart technology driven and marginalizing, and then there's smart humanity based on empathy, collaboration, and cooperation. Smart needs to have a firm base of human interaction and technology as a mediator and enabler. Thank you for that comment, Silly. So, Prof. Barry, I want to come to you. I'm mindful that you do need to head off at 3 p.m. So, two things I just, sort of want to get your comments on from as a lecturer, and being, the head of innovation at WITS, but also as the founder of the Timolokong precinct and working with entrepreneurs in that context, is on one hand, are we teaching the right things? Are we teaching content that is aligned to what the fourth industrial revolution requires? And are we producing a generation of, can I say, smart students, smart graduates who will be able to have the skills that we need for smart cities? And then on the other hand, from an entrepreneurial perspective, working with entrepreneurs, I know there's a group of entrepreneurs that are kind of, smart, that are survival based, and it's really about responding to the fact that they need to survive. And then there's a handful of entrepreneurs that are innovation based, and on an entrepreneurial front, do we have the right caliber of entrepreneurs coming through that can respond with innovations that enable, that partner with, and support ultimately the creation of smart cities.
Okay, can I start with your last question about the types of innovators? And I've seen that sort of divide between people who are entrepreneurial in a kind of non-technology base. They see problems around them and they look for solutions. And we clearly need those kinds of people. So it would be people who will take what exists and apply it in a different way. And I think there's huge need for people to be doing that. So, I frequently say that in Africa, we're blessed with many problems. We've got a lot of problems and a lot of things that have to be solved. And it's our blessing because it gives us a huge opportunity to be innovative. And what came out for me in the COVID shutdown was how quickly people transformed digitally without going on courses, without spending huge amounts of money. People picked up Teams or Zoom or Skype or whatever they had available, and they moved their life offline, and the world changed. And it didn't need new thinking, new technology, new skills. It needed people to solve problems. So I think there is a need for that. But I think as well that we in Africa can't be dependent on technology for innovation from the global north. We have to develop our own technologies that meet our own needs. And I think our universities across Africa, we've got fantastic universities in Africa that are growing tremendously quickly. And we have very, very, very smart people doing very smart work. And I think that what we really need to do is to link the research that our universities are doing to benefit, to kind of spin out technologies from what's happened. Too much of our university research lands up in journals and articles and higher degrees, but not in technologies and applications of those technologies. So I think that group of innovators, the high-tech innovators who'll grow out of our universities, need to be given a lot of oxygen and a lot of support and encouragement and training to be innovators. And I think that's one of the big challenges we have. Thanks, Ntsiki. I think that you're on mute still, Ntsiki.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had an issue unmuting myself. Thank you very much. And I think that's really it's a really good point around how do we support those kinds of entrepreneurs and those students. That I think if we are aligning innovation and aligning industrial revolution, that we need to be mindful that we're teaching the right kind of content and that we're ensuring that students and entrepreneurs have the support allows them to show up on that particular level. Prof, thank you very much. I was going to end up the panel discussion by our panelists. The one thing on the way forward, so what's the one thing everyone who's attended here today should walk away with to make a difference, or to start as an advocate, or to play their part in co-creating the kinds of smart cities before you leave us, Prof? If I could get your response on, what's the one thing we should all be doing in co-creating Africa in smart cities for an African context?
I think people need to get informed and they need to engage. We can't work in silos. We can't compete. I think we're in this together. People should get information from whatever source. It's so easy to get information. So get information and engage with others. That would be my advice. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Prof. Barry, for your time. It was a pleasure having you with us on this afternoon. panel discussion. I want to come back to you. And I'd like to link it to a question here from Victor, who says, what is your take on smart cities versus informal settlements in this fourth industrial revolution era, in line with service delivery challenges in South Africa? And I really want to hear about that from your perspective. One, as a lecturer, but, also, somebody who's in the space, understanding that we need to deconstruct certain aspects to rebuild. And I'm curious to know, what does that look like from...
Thanks, Ntsiki, and for that question, which I actually was going to pick up on, and I want to link it to this idea of Afrofuturism that Henning started but did not really engage, I think, fully. So for me, what's really important when we think about African cities, about informality, is that very term that we still see something else as formal and something else as informal or as a slum. And now there are very technical definitions of why certain spaces are considered informal and certain spaces are considered formal. And I think we also have to appreciate that this is largely how most of our cities are forming. They're not forming in very formal, long-term sort of master plan visions, which is what we see when we look at smart city developments and proposals. They are much more forming on an everyday, very rapid changes that are happening in our cities, which I think those master plans cannot meet up the demand of those kinds of changes. And so we find lots of periphery development happening that is considered informal, that in many cases is considered slums and all of those spaces. But I think even in those environments, there are systems, there are lots of innovations that are happening in those environments where people are finding ways to be resilient, to survive, and to make it day by day through those circumstances, surrounded by all those issues around service delivery, around water, around electricity, around internet connectivity. People are still able in some ways to innovate and to find ways of living. Yes, we may question the quality of life in those spaces. And I think that we can discuss as what is the quality of life that we would like everybody to have. But this obsession that a smart city or a developed city looks like this image, which has these glass buildings and all of those things, to me is very problematic. I am much more inclined to think about Wakanda. I am much more inclined to think about the work of many other African architects that are imagining different spaces from very African positions. I think much as we can criticize Wakanda, we can criticize this Afrofuturism, I think we have to center Africa in our visions for an African smart city. Without centering Africa, to me, we're constantly chasing an image in which we can't see ourselves in. And I think that will always be problematic. That will always not accommodate us. And so when 4IR comes in, does it center African people and African thoughts and African way of life? Or is that pushed to the periphery again to adjust to the kinds of norms that we think are ideal based on Western philosophies, Western ethics, Western values? So that would be my answer to that question. I don't know if it does really address it.
No, thank you very much for that. And what I'm really picking up from there is that integration, right? And that we need to make sure that we're going to the same place together and that everyone is going there together. And I think, Trevor, coming to you in the spirit of how do we make sure that when we're creating these cities, whether it is building new cities or building on the cities that already exist and making sure that they are able to adequately service everybody in there, how do we ensure that nobody is left behind? And to that, a lot of the conversation around smart cities is the tech aspect. And you spoke, and I'm curious around how do you also bridge that digital divide?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Breaking the back of this digital divide, I'm saying we should break its back because it seems to be very stubborn. We should fight it and break it. And how we do that is really by empowering our people with knowledge. That's the first thing, because knowledge will not equate to a structure or a space. It's knowledge, and it's applicable whether you are in a glass building or a shack. It can be applicable. So I think empowering people with knowledge is quite critical. And most importantly, I think that's what Prof said as well. He mentioned, or I think it was Henning who mentioned connectivity. Connectivity is very critical. So we need to find ways, or even governments, but also private sector institutions, to harness this issue of getting people to be connected or to have connectivity. And in the end, I believe that the main the breakthrough that we can make is through creating ecosystems that are more inclusive. Ecosystems as in, if big business, works with small businesses, or if governments work with small businesses and they don't exclude them, or if the young people are also given opportunities to, after being trained, to be placed in these workplaces or in government institutions, so that they can challenge how they operate and challenge their mindsets and the tools that they use. And in that way, they will help to revolutionize, how these systems work. It could be, there could be other examples, for instance, in the health sector or education sector, where we need to start, supporting these sectors in an incremental way. I think we should not try to just drop a big bomb of digital transformation. It should be incremental as well, and it should be systemic. We should create ecosystems that have to do with ordinary people accessing services using digital platforms. And then eventually some of them even growing to learn about what is the back end of those platforms. And eventually some people getting to maintain those platforms, and then eventually them becoming experts to the point where they would even innovate even better platforms that can be used in the cities or in the continent. So I think creating ecosystems will be quite critical, but knowledge is power. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Knowledge is indeed power, and ecosystems are very important. So Mani, speaking of ecosystems, I want to come to you, and really from a corporate perspective, from, I suppose representing, engineers and construction is going, are we thinking differently from an industry perspective? Do you see enough creative design thinking happening, enough disruptive thinking happening, enough theory of change happening? And in that context, what does mobility and creating urban cities look like, and how do we incorporate and ensure that we incorporate those as we design our smart cities?
Thanks, Ntsiki. I think from a planning perspective, that's really where it all starts. There are so many new trends that are coming, that are being put on the table, that is actually forcing us to start looking at things very differently. The design thinking principles are certainly coming to the fore. I'm finding I'm quite encouraged because, as teams now start collaborating, it's certainly adding a lot of value. And more importantly, even if you get diverse teams, it's not just about the gender issue. It's important that your teams are made up of diverse groupings, the cultural issues, the generational issues are also critically important. So in planning, it's important that your teams comprise of individuals that fit into these categories in order to get the best possible solutions. The challenge, though, is now obviously with the pandemic, we are going to have a repeat of this without a doubt into the future. So how do we kind of future-proof our cities? How do we actually plan differently? That's critically important as well. In terms of the ability and the flexibility with regards to working conditions and how does one respond to that, even in a smart cities concept, there are a number of moving parts to this puzzle. And that's what makes it so complex insofar as when we speak the technology issue, we're speaking design thinking concepts, we're speaking the impact of the pandemic. So it's important for us to collectively, and the Prof mentioned about the integrated approach. It's critically important that we have an integrated approach. And in my opinion, the thing that kind of drives this at the essence of it is certainly the issue related to commodities, the resources, and the catalysts. If any city to develop, I mean, Johannesburg is probably a prime example with the gold. For any city to develop, there needs to be some sort of catalyst. And I often believe that in planning, we don't necessarily, take due consideration of that. You could realistically be able to map out, and I think the Africa Free Trade Agreement is actually a very interesting one. And commodities being, maybe if we just consider resources, is that in planning cities, it's important for us to have those drivers. And those drivers are actually what dictates what happens. Because even in informal settlement environment, people stay in informal settlements because they want to be close to their places of employment. But we could really be changing that, changing it quite dramatically. If we were taking, work opportunities to rural communities, if we were considering the semi-migration and creating high-end sort of semi-retired opportunities in coastal towns, etc., and giving them good infrastructure to support that, we could be changing the way people work, live, and play, in a very conscious, way in terms of dictating that. So I would like to think that from a services, from a sort of a infrastructure perspective, even the challenges associated with mobility, in terms of commuting between places and the kind of road infrastructure that you would be providing, there's lots of things that are changing quite rapidly with drone technology and the like. So we might not even need to be traveling on those roads or even be investing in such infrastructure if we do things very differently. And I think that there's a lot of matters to be sort of done in a collaborative initiative. I do strongly advise against the silo mentality, because I think we're stronger in bringing our strengths to the table and being able to unpack this collectively as opposed to be planning in silos. And then I think it's exciting times ahead. I mean, because we've got this opportunity. I think we can seriously change the way Africa is looked at, on all fronts, and we should be, positioning ourselves appropriately right now to do exactly that. Sorry,
I completely agree with
that's
you.
all from me. Thanks.
Ways to look at this. Thanks, Malani. Definitely two ways to look at this is, is there something being forced upon us, or are we going to rise up and take on the opportunity to create something fresh and new, and knowing that we do have power and agency in this. David, I want to come to you, and I think from a government perspective, from a policy perspective, just speaking to the environment. I know you guys have been doing some interesting work in Nigeria. How does government come to the fore in creating the right kind of regulatory framework, and making sure that we're not working in silos, as Malani says, but that there's integration from different government departments as well as within the education system, and as well as making sure that as young as possible in the education system that we're getting our youth to be thinking about smart cities and how they show up.
Thank you. Just like I think I will key to the top speaker, and you remember what he said, that education is power. Truly, education is power. Information is power. Because we can be talking about smart cities in Africa or in Nigeria or in South Africa without the citizens being smart. Because you agree with me that when no matter the which amount of resources that could be invested in any smart city or smart communities, and the people were not being well informed, they are not well taught, it could be mismanaged, and it may not even properly be tapped the way it should be. And by the end of the whole day, the citizens that ordinarily should be the beneficiary of this whole project may not even see the dividends or even see the positive side of it. So back to, what the government are doing in Nigeria here, as I told you earlier, the Nigerian government actually, launched its own blueprints of the smart cities in 2017. And in that same 2017, the Nigerian government also established an agency that will also complement that blueprint, which is the National Information for Technology. It's an agency of government, and also a ministry was also established, which is the Ministry of Digital Economy. These are very critical government institutions that can really drive the smart cities project, to a very large extent. Then back to the citizens, like one of the things that we do at the African Smart Cities is that we engage the government at all level, both at the local government, the state, and of course at the federal level, because that's always a need, because they are decision makers, but they may not necessarily understand the technical knowledge of this whole project, because they are politicians. So we have the responsibility of engaging them to see the positivities of this whole project, and to be able to know the policy that is actually sustainable and implementable on this project at all levels. And back to the other citizens, the youth, the younger ones, there's a project that organizations have embarked on for the past about 3 years now, which it has to do with the secondary schools in Abuja here. We target catch them young. And catch them young has to do with the younger people, in a club, a social club we call a Smart Cities Club in the schools. And in this club, we are to engage the younger ones, giving them the elementary knowledge of what the smart cities is, and in African perspective. The African perspective, not just what they see on the social media or what they read on the social media no, but the African perspectives of the smart cities. So we try as much as possible to engage them at that tender age, because we knew that when they grow up, there's every tendency of them traveling there to the country to further their studies and all that. But it is very much important for the nation and even to the citizens themselves to have the knowledge of the African smart cities perspective, which it will be so much useful to Nigeria and Africa at large. Then back to the other segment of the artisans. We also engage with the artisans, particularly their leaders, because we have them in a different groups. We have the artisans in different groups, and the reason why we actually engage in these people is that we got to understand the fact that the level which they operate now is not sustainable. They can't even make use of the knowledge or the skills they were having now. It's already even outdated. It's not even sustainable in the next 5 years. So we try as much as possible to introduce them to a more technological training, innovations, and more creativity beyond what they had on their head already. And this is actually helping a lot, because this is going to have more value to what they're doing, because we know that if you don't do that in the next 5 years or 10 years, the smart ones will take their job from them. And as I earlier always said to people, as a smart cities, it takes jobs from some people and it creates a lot of lucrative jobs to some citizens as well. So it is very important that the citizens that are not actually smart, it is very important you key into that smart project so that it can be relevant in the business, it can be relevant in the society, and even to yourself. Very important. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. I like that point on relevance, and I would definitely say hashtag catch them young. And definitely it's about creating that pipeline of entrepreneurs, of smart citizens, and people who can participate. Our panel is out of time, and I'm hoping that our guests that are joining us virtually will allow us 2 minutes grace just to run over, just so we can wrap up our panel discussion. I'd like to give each of our panelists just a sound bite, 30-second sound bite on what do you think our next steps are? So what's the next action plan we should be taking to ensure that we are creating the right skills and co-creating smart cities that are relevant in an African context? Sound bites, Jabu, let's start with you.
We need to patent our indigenous knowledge systems so that we can benefit from them and no one else can.
Perfect. Thank you. Trevor, and then Melanie as soon as Trevor's done.
Thank you. So we need to understand exactly what is it that we need to what skills do we need to develop. So research is quite important to support this from an African perspective. And we have a lot of data that we can mine, and that can give us a direction. Thank you.
Ntsiki, I trust you going on to me. I think we need to use this opportunity to catapult our offering on the continent. Certainly, I do believe that, as I said before, hybrid smart cities is what should be the order of the day. And we need to seriously look at, circular economies to drive that as well. So catalysts and economic activity to actually drive that. Thanks.
Thank you. And David, your soundbite.
Yes, the government should continue implementing, policies that are implementable. They should keep on approving policies that are implementable and that are so sustainable, particularly in the innovation and technology aspect. This is what the smart cities actually beckon on. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Patent, research and skills, closed economies, and government support. I really appreciate you coming together and sharing your afternoon with us, and to just share your insights as experts in the various fields and disciplines that you guys are involved in. Jabu, thank you so much. Trevor, thank you. Malani, thank you. David, thank you. And then also to Henning and Prof. Barry, who've had to leave us. Thank you very much. And to the team who put this together, we really appreciate your coordination. And for guests who are joining us virtually, really chew on the information that we've shared here. And I hope what you take away from this is knowing that the cities are still in discussion stage, right? And we get to decide the Africa that we want and the Africa that we want to be part of. So see yourself as a change maker, see yourself as a contributor, see yourself as a co-creator, and let us go make incredible African cities for the Africa that we all want to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, bye.